Hi, and welcome to The Existential Coach. This week I want to talk about boundaries, which is something that I've talked about in various different ways in different podcasts, but I wanted to return to that theme today and talk perhaps more explicitly about boundaries and the ways in which boundaries can be eroded in our relationships, and how we may not realize or understand that these boundaries are being eroded simply because the relationships and how we are used to those relationships operating normalize these erosions. They take them and they conceal them in a sense. And I'll explain this more in a bit, but the focus here is to think about what agency do we have? And as we talk about boundaries, I want to kind of check ourselves and use this as a way to understand, am I being heard? What does being heard mean? And that reflects this question of agency. In other words, can I express my thoughts and feelings as a free being, have somebody hear those thoughts and feelings, and reflect them back to me without trying to cajole or otherwise control those feelings and thoughts that I have to meet what they think should happen, to meet the expectations they have, the desires, the wants they have, the needs they have, and so on. And this is where boundaries becomes really a key part of any relationship that has respect as a fundamental value. Now, we are used to this notion of persuasion. We're used to this idea of, well, we gotta win an argument or talk somebody in or convince somebody to do something, and we tend to think of that as being a good skill set, right? To sell somebody something that maybe they don't need, or most likely they don't need, convince somebody to do something that they don't really want to do, but it benefits you in whatever way. So there's so many ways in which this form of coercion is not only normalized in our society, but it is celebrated. The art of convincing somebody is moved from this, what is really about bullying or taking control of somebody else, and become somehow this benign act that it is okay to simply push somebody to an ends that they don't really want because it's really, we've decided, better for them. Now, why has this happened in our society? I'll only touch upon a few possible ways of looking at this, and I think there are many. But I think as I contemplate my experience in terms of why I've felt pushed in or cajoled or what have you into doing things in a certain way, into feeling compelled to do things in a certain way. And these were ways that I questioned, yet, and this is the key, I had doubts about my own agency. I had doubts about my own opinion, my own right, if you will, to say, that doesn't seem to make sense. That doesn't seem to be whatever I was thinking. Honest, thoughtful, respectful, whatever it was. But my insecurity led me to accept this boundary blurring, this kind of deconstructing of my identity. And instead, what happened was I thought, well, I guess I should go with the flow. Now, one of the things that happens in our relationships is, and arguably the most defining aspect of the human experience, is predicated upon the experience of attachment that we have to one another. And the quality of that attachment defines our experience in such a way as to really shape how we see the world. In other words, if I feel like I am safely attached to people, then the way I see the world is as a place that is safe. And if I see the world that is a place that is safe, then I am able to move more freely, to think more freely, and to express myself more freely. So going back to this idea of doubt, it follows that if I am having these doubts, and we kind of reverse engineer it, then really are what we're saying is that is a kind of symptom of an attachment break, of a boundary violation, if you will. And if we can start to look at these, what I often think of as the canary in the coal mine, these experiences where we have this doubt, we have to do something about that doubt. The option is we say, okay, well, what's going on with my attachments? Or we say, or an answer we say to that is, well, it's something wrong with me. My expectations are too high. My needs are unclear. I'm weird. Whatever it is that we say. Now, that becomes amplified to such an extent that we no longer hear the voice of agency within us. That is, the voice that is saying, I am here, I want these kinds of safe attachments. We start to think, well, I can't really have safe attachments because of X, Y, and Z. And we come up with whatever reasons, right? Because the other person wants something, or the other people want something, because I have these responsibilities to people, a work thing, let's say, or a family thing. But those are all conceptualizations of what it means to be in relationships. They're conceptualizations. And we really need to underline this notion that having concepts about connection is not connection, in the same way that the theory of gravity is not gravity. These are distinct things. The theory of something is an understanding, an interpretation, a way of understanding, a way of interpreting. So, you think of it as an example in music, and, people study music and they say, well, I've got to learn music theory. And there becomes this confusion that music theory is music. It is the experience of music. It is the phenomenological experience of music. And that is, of course, incorrect. But in a universe, in a world, in a perspective that favors this form of conceptualization over the felt experience, that's when it starts to make sense. However, at what cost? If conceptualizations are blocks to our felt experience, if conceptualizations and rationalizations are used to minimize and suppress and repress, cajole, conform, if they are used to, in whatever way, fragment the felt experience and belittle and bully the felt experience, then it follows that this most fundamental need that we have to be attached is now broken. What happens when an attachment experience is broken? What happens when the most fundamental needs that we have, the mammalian needs to connect, are fractured? What happens when we do not feel safe? I'm not talking about conceptually. I'm not talking about this idea of, oh, well, mentally speaking, I have all of these things in place, therefore I should be safe. I am conceptually safe. I am theoretically safe. I'm talking about what happens when you do not feel safe. So, if we go back to where we started, this question of boundaries, and we imagine a relationship. We're in a relationship with somebody, and we are expressing our feelings. And they're messy and confusing and all the things that feelings, all of the wonderful, messy beauty of emotion. And the other person feels uncomfortable because they feel threatened by this experience. They feel, oh my God, this person is going to leave me, or this person is going to do these chaotic things that I don't really understand. And now I'm having this emotional response and I don't know what to do. And so now what happens is some form of oppression, some tactical way to control, suppress the felt experience because it is perceived as dangerous. Now, let's just ask ourselves, what can we possibly know if our felt experience is something that we fear? Well, it's like a pot that's not very deep. We can't put very much water in it. So if we are having a felt experience, we share that with a partner, we share that with a friend, they freak out in whatever way. And we then think, well, I guess I can't really show this stuff. Now, we're not consciously thinking about, what we're actually feeling is, this is not safe. I should not express these things. I should not feel these things. These things are wrong. I have actually done something that is causing this. They're not listening to me. They're not hearing my attachments. They're not feeling me. They're not accepting me. So I guess there's something wrong with me. And that's our way of trying to understand how this very fundamental need to connect, this fundamental mammalian need to connect, is not happening. These boundaries are not being respected. There is not this dance between people that accepts the nature of attachment as fundamental to our being. Arguably, connection/attachment is the most fundamental aspect of the human experience. And if we do not recognize that, if we do not recognize this most fundamental of needs, that doesn't mean the need vanishes. That doesn't mean we go, oh, well, I guess I just don't need to be attached. I guess I don't need to feel safe. That's fine. And this is where we get into a situation that individuals start to self-harm. Now, self-harm takes on many, many, many different forms. The kinds of things that we see externally are things like people not eating or eating in excess. That is, let's not say excess. Let's say people doing things with food that is trying to compensate for attachment needs. So psychological relationships. We see it with alcohol, with drugs. We see it with sex, shopping, exercising. There's compulsion about even pets can be a way to avoid one's own felt sense because they're only able to get a relationship with a pet that they can't get with other people. And there are situations when people will quite directly say, my pets are my most important thing, so don't ever try and get in the way of that. Now, of course, pets are very, very important. But I can't help but wonder, what is the quality of relationships that we are saying to people, hey, don't try and take this away from me. This is the thing I can count on. These are the real attachment figures in my life. We might have a relationship for a short time or maybe for a long time, but I fundamentally am connected here. And that speaks, I think, to a very essential need that we have for attachment. And some people might feel that, well, these are just normal things. And they are normal. They're normal because attachment is normal, right? They're normal because the need to connect is normal. They're normal because this is actually what it means to be a human being. So with boundaries and relationships that infringe upon or break these connections, we have to step back and ask ourselves, well, what does a healthy relationship look like? And in my experience, I can say that I don't really know, and I don't think other people really know. Now, how is that possible? We've got all of these books and all of this insight, and people are talking about relationships, and they're talking about values and connections and their best self and all of these different things. How can we be so bad at relationships, even though one would think in this age of self-actualization, shouldn't we be really good at it? Well, isn't that a sign of a deficiency in and of itself? What I mean is, there's a saying, doth think he or she protests too much. When we start to exaggerate a phrase to such an extent, when we start to say, I'm my best self, these are my boundaries, everything is good, I'm in control, does it not reflect a kind of conditioning that says, I don't really have the unconditional experience of safe boundaries in this world. Instead, I am enduring relationships and have found ways through other ways of compensating and filling myself, my needs, my attachment needs, whether that's having pets or going to the gym or whatever it is. And we say, these are the things that I hold on to creating meaning in my life and feeling fulfilled, because I'm not getting them in these relationships because there is a fissure or a break in these boundaries. So I want to give an example of what I'm talking about and how you can check these kinds of boundary violations, because it seems to be really unclear, but I would say It's actually perfectly crystal clear. So when I'm talking with people about boundaries, I will ask them to share something that came up in a situation with a partner or a friend or coworker or whatever it was, where they were not heard. I will ask them to say that to me. And what I do, and this is the simple part that I think is a way for all of us to ground ourselves, is I listen to what they say. I then repeat what they say, sometimes pretty much word for word, back to them, and then thank them for saying that to me. That is the baseline of boundaries. Anything beyond that is coercion. Now, people might say, well, that's pretty radical. I mean, you can disagree with people. It's like, well, wait a second. Does disagreement mean not hearing? If the point of disagreeing with somebody is to negate their words, is that disagreeing or is that oppression? Is that tyranny? That strikes me as being quite different than hearing somebody's view, repeating it back or confirming with them that you have heard them correctly, thanking them, and i.e. acknowledging that they have shared their experience, and then perhaps saying something as a distinct thing. But if you're trying to get them to stop thinking that way, to change the way they're thinking, then aren't we engaged in a form of oppression? And if so, where is that coming from? This is where we cycle back to this idea of how attachments are modeled in our culture. Now, so if we look at our society, we don't have to look for very long to find a disparity between classes, between races, between genders, between pretty much anything that an opposition can be operationalized in. It is. So when we have an operationalized opposition, which means somebody is trying to benefit from the exploitation of somebody else, and that thinking is in our society and embedded into our society. The way we sell things, the way we celebrate things, and it's this ubiquitous aspect to our lived social experience. Then when we're in relationships and we say something to somebody and they don't listen to us, they don't mirror back what we've said, they don't acknowledge what we said, it seems normal to us because within this system, the society that we're in, it is totally normal to not listen to anybody. And in fact, the premium is placed on the emboldened person to ignore, to literally defy the fact that others disagree. And I think one of the things that happens, we certainly see this in the questions about vaccination, is we see movements that are focused on selecting information, operationalizing information that serves a fundamental attachment need. And that attachment need is to have a group of people, whatever that group of people, and that is shaped within this idea of, well, that's what freedom is, that's what agency is, that's what it means, what liberty is. But those are conceptions. And in the same way I talked earlier about this idea of the conceptual notion of freedom, the conceptual notion of connection, these are concepts. What does attachment actually mean? What does it mean to actually be attached to people? Well, if we do not feel attached to people, if we do not feel that those relationships, we can trust those relationships, if we feel in whatever way othered, and the only voice we have is to shut down anything that seems to threaten our righteous position, whatever that is, then all of a sudden we've placed ourselves in a very precarious situation, which is we actually cannot listen to people. We cannot listen to our partners. We cannot listen to our friends. We have a view, and if we conceptually shift away from that concept, we think we lose that underlying attachment. In other words, the issue, the concept, the conceptualization is so interwoven with the most fundamental need that we have to attach that we can no longer distinguish the two. And this is a key tenet of propaganda, but it's a key tenet of any form of rhetoric, which is you cannot conceptually change your mind about something because you will therefore lose the attachment and therefore are in danger, which is why we enter into a state of being triggered. And I think that notion of being triggered, that notion of being attached and detached, and those fundamental relationships being broken, these boundaries being broken and so on, speaks to the mammalian need, the human need to connect as fundamental to all experiences, and that the concepts and the conceptions that we have about that, whatever they are happening on a level of abstraction. And that level of abstraction cannot meet the attachment needs that we have. In other words, if we need to be held, being told I'm holding you and experiencing being held are two distinct things. In the same way that gravity and the theory of gravity are different. In the same way that reading a theory book is different than listening to music and experiencing music. The theory of something, the conception of something is distinct from the actual felt experience of that thing, that connection, that bond. And within that bond exists a fundamental trust of survival, which is without that trust, without that sense of groundedness, that sense of I am here, I am connected, you are here, and we are felt safe, that we are feeling safe, that we are experiencing safe. And from that can emerge ideas and concepts and feelings and so on and so forth. When that happens, different opinions, different ideas are not threatening. But if boundaries are a conditional response to whether or not somebody can be attached, then we are engaged in a process of oppression. And this is why I think these things, even though we tend to think of our experiences when we're having a struggle in a relationship as being a relationship problem, it's us and our partner or our coworker or whomever, these are actually much larger in terms of how we are framing and understanding the social context within which we are existing. And certainly, questions that arise in any political movement come down to this similar type of question, which is, what are the attachment versus the conceptual needs? Who's operationalizing the concepts? Which creates the condition for the attachment. So to change your opinion means to lose your attachment. So you can't change your opinion. That is by definition oppression. You no longer have the freedom to think freely. You are engaged in a quid pro quo. And when this happens, and it happens in all walks of life, we start to, and I've mentioned this before, in various different ways, react. And one of those is self-harm. One of those ways is to think, well, maybe I shouldn't live. Maybe I don't matter. Maybe I'm nothing. Well, how long can you be in that state before you do something? Whether it's become involved in an organization or a movement that tells you that you are something, all you have to do is A, B, and C, or you engage in self-harm in the form of some kind of self-abuse, you starve yourself, you drink, you do whatever it is that helps to push down a form of self-medicating. It's a kind of asceticism where you are depriving yourself because you think, well, the problem that I have here is that I want attachment. So all I have to do is teach myself how to not want attachment, and then I'll be okay. Think about that. Think about what that means, how haunting that is, to get to a point where we think, all I need to do is to learn how to not feel this human fundamental need, and then everything will be okay. I'm not sure there's anything more disturbing then coming to a conclusion where we have to deny, we have to negate what it means to be human. And this has happened because we have not been mirrored by people. We have not had our words respectfully mirrored back. We have not had people thank us for our views, our feelings, our expressions. And we have not experienced what it means to have a tolerance that goes beyond the needs of attachment, understanding that the different conceptual notions of good, bad, right, wrong, and so on are points that can be debated. And they are separate from the condition that we all need to connect. We all need attachment. So, just to kind of loop back and do a little bit of a recap, the way we can practice this and do a little bit of a check-in with ourselves is if we're having relationships with people and we find increasingly that what we're saying is not being heard, and we start to notice that we're maybe doing things. We're saying, well, I guess I shouldn't feel that way. I guess I'm being too emotional, too sensitive, too needy, perhaps. We say, okay, well, what does that mean? Are the things I'm saying, are they being heard? Have we... Because my sense is that a part of us is moving towards an understanding that is not conditional. And my feeling and thought is we're trapped between two epistemological frames. That is, we're in a world that is very focused on what it means to have solutions, what it means to have answers, what it means to be right. Yet, which creates a very myopic way of looking at things. Yet, we're not looking at the world as an experience of attachment that has different opinions, and those different opinions and views are discussed. So, we're getting stuck, in effect, in this notion that attachments and our attachment needs can only be met through conception. So, as we kind of come to the end of this episode, and we think about thoughts and feelings, and we reflect upon what it is that we are feeling in our lives, and we start to self-monitor how these doubts are really canaries in the coal mine they're asking us to think more broadly, that there's a conceptual dimension to our lives, the theory of side of our lives, and then there's the felt sense. And we can have different theories and different opinions. Yet, if those are used to undermine our experience, if those are used to take away what it is that we are feeling and create a sense of threat, that without doing the things conceptually that we're being told by the other, that we are in danger, then it naturally follows that this danger we experience is something we will have to respond to. So how do we release ourselves from that sense that to have attachment needs, to have the needs to be unconditionally heard, unconditionally loved, to be unconditionally experienced, is something that we should try and numb within ourselves? How do we shift away from this idea that these attachments are things that we shouldn't want? Because if it is, as I and others feel it is and think it is, the most fundamental aspect of human existence, does it make any conceptual sense to deny this fundamental need to connect? And even if individuals start to try and convince us that their way of living, their way of thinking is right, can we ask ourselves, why are they not allowing me to think what I think? And why are they not allowing me to feel connection in a safe way? What is the fundamental fissure or schism that is going on here? And I think with boundaries, there is this notion that, well, I've just got to build them to create more defenses. And the thing I'm always challenging about boundaries is, why are we building them? Are we building them because we are hurt? Are we building them because we have people who do not respect us and our agency? Then does it not make more sense to say, you're not respecting me? This is not a boundaries, I need more boundaries. It's not a question of I need more defense to deal with the fact that I'm in this environment that is very dangerous. It's a question of I need people to understand the fundamental nature of attachment and to not try and use these conceptual gates to push me out of this experience of what it is to be attached. So this is a topic I'll keep on returning to. It's something that I think a lot about, and obviously when I talk to different people about their experiences, new ways of looking at this arise. And as I go through my experiences and exploring my felt sense, I get a deeper understanding of the way in which attachment and attachment needs operate in my life and how I've used rationalizations and conceptualizations to avoid this really fundamental attachment need. So I think it's something that has been important in my life, and I feel like it's this thing that we still aren't paying a great deal of attention to, even though we are talking about our actualized selves and our best selves and all these things. That still feels really conceptual. I don't get a sense that we're really getting to the root of what attachment fundamentally means and how we fundamentally need attachment. And I say I don't get a sense of that because the more we understand the fundamental nature of attachment, the less othering we can do, right? The less we can think in terms of these reductionistic ways of dividing people, because we see that, well, wait a second, we all have these needs. We all have these attachment needs. We can have different opinions and we can talk about them, but if we can't hear each other and we won't hear each other, what that says to me is there's actually an emotional pathology going on here, that we are in a state of arrested development, that we're yelling at each other because the idea of listening is so interwoven with the idea of connection that we cannot distinguish between the two. And that is what it is to be in a hostile environment where there is no unconditional love, there is no unconditional acceptance. It is all condition. And we see that in political movements in particular that speak very directly about their view. So politics is something we might approach in another podcast. But for now, I think asking ourselves and returning to that idea of the baseline, am I being heard? If I say to somebody, I have these needs, and they say, yeah, but, or I don't want to, or you shouldn't, or this, that, and the other thing, you are not being heard. Check that you are being respectfully looped. Check that you are being respectfully valued. Check that your words are being heard. You feel that you are being heard. They're coming back to you and you're being heard. That is what it means to have a healthy boundary, healthy attachment. Okay. Thanks as always. Any questions or comments, you can reach out to me at jordano'connor.com. All right. Bye for now.